A soldier rushes in to save a millionaire's son from what looks like just another kidnapping. But as the boy trembles in his arms and whispers what really happened, the soldier realizes this wasn't random. It was planned, calculated, and the truth behind who's involved is far more terrifying than he ever imagined. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because when you stop doing this, YouTube understands that you don't like this content and stops recommending good stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. The scream shattered the quiet of the northern Boston woods. It was a place Daniel Reed walked every afternoon, not for leisure, but to impose order on a mind that threatened to unravel. The sound was sharp, high-pitched, and devoid of the playful echo that follows a child's game. It was a solitary, desperate cry that sliced through the air and struck something primal within him. He stopped, the rhythm of his steady pace broken. He listened for a heartbeat, his head cocked, confirming the sound's direction and nature. Then, without a second thought, he turned and ran, plunging directly into the dense underbrush. His movements were economical and silent, a stark contrast to the panic in the cry he pursued. Through a thicket of branches he saw it, and his body went rigid for a split second. A black truck was parked just at the forest's edge, its back doors gaping open. A tall man in a hooded sweatshirt was dragging a small boy toward it. The boy, who couldn't be more than 6, had his mouth crudely taped shut, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond tears. A few feet away, a second man stood ready, a stun gun held loosely in his hand, his posture radiating a nervous energy. Daniel didn't hesitate. He didn't weigh the odds or consider the danger. He simply reacted, the years of training taking over his body as if the uniform had never come off. He dropped his water bottle, his right hand moving fluidly to his belt, where he unclipped a folding knife. 3 strides, low and fast, and he launched himself from the shadows of the trees. The first man never saw him coming. A hard knee connected with his gut, forcing the air from his lungs in a pained grunt. In the same motion, Daniel twisted the man's arm, wrenching his grip from the boy. The child tumbled to the ground, landing on the damp soil. The second man flinched, startled by the sudden violence, and fired the stun gun. But the veteran soldier had already moved, anticipating the reaction. He dove to the side, the electric probes zipping past him. As he rolled, his knife spun through the air in a controlled arc, slashing the man's forearm. The stun gun clattered uselessly to the ground. Daniel was back on his feet instantly. He grabbed the boy by the shoulder. "Run into the woods," he ordered, his voice low and firm. The boy hesitated, his terrified eyes locked on Daniel's. "Now," Daniel's voice hardened, leaving no room for argument. This time, the boy listened, scrambling to his feet and disappearing into the trees. Daniel stepped back, positioning himself between the boy's path and the 2 defeated men, ready for another attack. But it wasn't necessary. Both were on the ground, groaning, their brief and brutal kidnapping attempt over. 12 minutes later, the wail of sirens echoed from the East Trail. Daniel stood still in the clearing, his arms raised slightly to show he was not a threat. His sleeves were soaked with sweat and blood that was not his own. "Drop the knife!" an officer shouted through a bullhorn, his voice tense. "It's over there on the ground," Daniel replied, his own voice low and rough, projecting a calm he didn't entirely feel. A police captain stepped forward, his eyes methodically scanning the scene. 2 unconscious men being cuffed by his officers, a bloodied knife in the dirt, drag marks leading to the van, and, near an ambulance, a young boy being comforted by paramedics. The boy pointed a small, trembling finger. "He saved me." The door opened, and a woman in a tailored business suit stepped out, her expensive heels sinking slightly into the damp soil. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a sharp, unshaken clarity that spoke of immense control. "Sophie Laval," the officer said, identifying the boy's mother. "Your son Leo is safe." "Where's Leo?" She followed his gaze, and then her eyes landed on Daniel. They narrowed. "Who are you?" "I don't know the boy. I was just out walking." Something made her hesitate, a flicker of instinct honed in a world where appearances were often deceiving. "We need you to come to the station and give a statement," the officer said to Daniel. He nodded once in agreement. "I'll cooperate." He didn't run to the officer or to the woman in the suit. He ran straight toward Daniel. The boy wrapped his small arms around Daniel's leg, clinging to him without a trace of the fear he should have felt for a complete stranger. The entire security team, the police and Sophie stood stunned into silence. A 6-year-old, just rescued from a violent kidnapping, was now seeking comfort from a man with blood on his sleeves. "I'm okay now," Leo mumbled into Daniel's pants, his voice muffled. Daniel gently knelt, placing a large hand on Leo's shoulder. "You did great," he said softly, "but now you need to go back to your mum." Leo turned to look at Sophie, then back at Daniel. As Daniel stood to step into the waiting police car, he glanced at the boy one last time. And in that moment, the way Leo looked at him, wide-eyed, unblinking, it hit him with the force of a physical blow. His heart skipped. He didn't know why, but that boy's face, that look in his eyes, felt heartbreakingly familiar. Here is Chapter 2, developed according to your instructions. Chapter 2, Clues from the Past. Sophie Laval found Daniel Reed after he had finished giving his statement at the police station. He was standing near the exit, a solitary figure ready to melt back into the anonymity of the city. The hardened CEO demeanor she wore like armor had been replaced by the raw, frayed edges of a mother who had come too close to the abyss. "Mr. Reed," she began, her voice strained but firm, "I need to ask you for something. I've told the police everything I know." "It's for my son," she said, taking a step closer. "Leo, he refuses to leave the medical station. He won't let the doctors finish checking him over. He won't speak to me. He won't do anything unless you are with him." The words seemed to cost her a great deal to admit. "He doesn't trust anyone but you. I'm asking you to come to our home, just for one night. There will be a doctor on site, a proper place to rest." And Leo would feel more at ease. He wasn't a part of their world. He was a ghost who had merely passed through it. He wasn't used to being needed, especially not by a child. He looked past her and saw Leo sitting on a gurney, holding a housekeeper's coat tightly. The boy's eyes were still swollen, but they lit up the moment they met Daniel's. That strange magnetic pull he'd felt in the forest returned. It was a connection that defied logic. He gave a slow, reluctant nod. "All right," Daniel said, his voice rough. "Just one night." Sophie sat in the front passenger seat, whispering urgently into her phone, managing the fallout of the day's events. Daniel sat in the back, next to Leo. The boy didn't speak much, but he kept glancing up at him, his small shoulder occasionally brushing against Daniel's arm. "Are you okay?" Leo asked softly at one point. Daniel, surprised by the question, managed a faint smile. "I'm fine. How about you?" The boy just nodded, seemingly content with his presence. As the iron gates of the estate opened, Daniel felt an instinctive tension grip him. The mansion that appeared between the trees was a monument of modern architecture, all glass and sharp angles, but it felt eerily quiet. A housekeeper opened the main door but didn't greet him by name, her gaze assessing him as an anomaly, a foreign object entering a sterile environment. Sophie led him into a living room so spacious and cold, it felt more like a gallery than a home. Abstract paintings hung on the stark white walls, and a gas fireplace glowed with a soft, warm light that did nothing to chase away the lingering emptiness of the space. Leo was taken upstairs by the housekeeper, Clara. The boy looked back over his shoulder at Daniel. "Don't go anywhere, okay?" Sophie gestured for him to sit, then disappeared into the kitchen, returning a few minutes later with 2 cups of hot coffee. "Thank you for not turning us down," she said, her voice softer now. "A kid was still shaking," Daniel said, taking the cup. "That's not my style to walk away from." "You were in the military," she stated, not a question. "The way you moved, fast, precise, without hesitation, that's not how regular people react." Daniel simply shrugged, offering no confirmation or denial. Sophie watched him for a moment, her analytical mind trying to piece him together. "I have a question, and I hope you don't find it strange. Why did my son trust you the moment he saw you? But when I saw him, I felt like I'd seen that face somewhere before. In it, a much younger Leo, perhaps 3 years old, was holding a wooden toy airplane and grinning from ear to ear. Something in the image made Daniel stand up and walk over to it. His expression darkened as he reached out and gently touched the glass frame. David, Leo's father, made that for him," Sophie said from behind him. "He passed away 3 years ago. A car accident. I made one just like it," he said, his voice low, almost identical. "Back when I was in the military hospital." "You were in a military hospital?" "Back in 2018. Before she could respond, she seemed to shake it off. "Leo won't fall asleep unless he hears your voice," she said, her tone shifting back to the immediate problem. "Would you mind going upstairs for a bit?" Upstairs, Leo was sitting on his bed, drawing with his knees pulled up to his chest. When he saw Daniel, his face lit up. "You're here." "I was waiting for you," the boy said, handing him a drawing. It was a crude but clear picture of Daniel pulling him out of the black van. "My teacher says I have a big imagination," Leo said quietly. But today it wasn't imagination. Leo tilted his head, his expression serious. "Do you have any kids?" Daniel froze, the memory of his own loss rising like a phantom. He swallowed hard. "I did," he finally managed to say, the 2 words holding a universe of pain. "But my child passed away." He just pulled his pillow closer. Then he looked at Daniel with those same clear, familiar eyes and asked a question that unmade him completely. "Then, can you be my pretend dad tonight?" He lay on the spare bed in the guest room, eyes wide open, staring at a ceiling he couldn't see. The image of Leo asking him to be a pretend dad kept flashing in his mind. On the nightstand, Sophie had placed a small bottle of antiseptic spray, the kind used in hospitals. He picked it up, and when he pressed the nozzle, the scent hit him instantly, triggering a memory with unsettling clarity. It was a stark white hospital room, the air thick with that same sharp smell. A slender, slightly cold hand was touching his forehead, and a steady, low voice spoke close to his ear. "What's your name?" "Reed." "Daniel," he had mumbled through a fog of pain and medication. He saw the woman scribble something down on a chart. The name tag on her white coat read Sophie L. Daniel shot upright, cold sweat trickling down his neck. He had dismissed it as a dream for years, a phantom created by his subconscious. But it wasn't. He couldn't deny it anymore. He got out of bed and walked into the living room, drawn by the dim glow of the nightlight. On a shelf, he saw Sophie's earrings, teardrop-shaped with deep blue stones. And then he remembered another detail, one that sent a chill up his spine. A small, hook-shaped scar behind her left ear, visible when she had leaned forward to write something down in that hospital room. It couldn't be a coincidence. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, but it did nothing to dispel the tension Daniel felt. He sat silently at the sofa, watching Leo dig through a pile of books on a shelf. Sophie was in her office, the door just slightly ajar. Clara, the housekeeper, set a cup of coffee in front of him before stepping back, quietly observing. As Leo pulled out an old, leather-bound notebook, a small, folded piece of paper slipped out and fell to the floor. Daniel bent down to pick it up. He should have put it back, but an instinct he couldn't explain made him unfold it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. March 17th. A young soldier named D. Reed woke after 9 days in a coma. His eyes looked like they had already died. Daniel's hand froze. There was no mistaking it. That was him. That was the day he came out of the coma after the explosion in Fallujah. Just then, Sophie stepped out of her office. Her eyes flicked immediately to the paper in his hand, and she stopped in her tracks. Daniel didn't look up. His gaze locked on the words. "March 17th of that year," he said, his voice flat and hard. "That was the day I left the recovery ward. You recorded it. You remembered me. That was just a clinical note from my internship," she said, her voice tight. "I cared for dozens of cases each week." "Then why write about me specifically? Just one line, one name." There are no other entries like it in that notebook. She turned away, visibly uneasy, but her silence told Daniel everything he needed to know. He let out a long, slow breath and reached into the inner pocket of his coat, pulling out a worn, creased envelope containing his old military personal file. He rifled through it and took out a single sheet of paper. It was a confirmation of his participation in a military genetic study. He held it out to her. "I once signed on for a genetic research program," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "They asked for biological samples to be used for studies and possibly stored. Back then, I didn't ask questions. I just thought it was like giving blood, nothing more." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers, demanding the truth. "Let me ask you something. When is Leo's birthday?" "December 14th, she whispered. Daniel pulled a discharge document from the envelope and laid it on the table beside the genetic consent form. "I was discharged on March 13th, 2019, he stated, the words hanging heavily in the air. Just about 9 months before Leo was born. She collapsed into a chair, the fight draining out of her. "I also participated in a fertility support program," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "It was completely confidential. I never knew who the donor was. I wasn't allowed to. They just gave me a sample code. I selected a profile based on immunity and antibody compatibility with my health records. I didn't think beyond that. I couldn't. That boy wasn't afraid of him. He didn't need time to warm up. He ran straight into his arms as if he knew something, as if he recognized a part of himself." Daniel turned back, his eyes red with a mix of shock and dawning comprehension. "If all this is true," he said, his voice slow and thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in years, "if I was the donor, then Leo is my son." The truth had come out, a door thrown open that could never be shut again. The strong, inexplicable bond he felt with the boy wasn't just a coincidence or a feeling. It was the undeniable, primal instinct of blood. The truth hung in the air between them, heavy and fragile. The revelation that Leo was his son had transformed Daniel from a stranger into something more complex, a guardian with a stake he was only just beginning to comprehend. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the tense stillness before a storm. Daniel found himself scanning the perimeter of the vast, cold house, his old instincts humming just beneath the surface. He was watching the security monitors in the small surveillance room off the main hall when he heard it, a faint, soft click from the speakers, like an electric gate being expertly tampered with. A moment later, one of the screens showing the west fence flickered, the signal starting to break up. "What the hell?" the young bodyguard on duty muttered, tapping the screen. "They're jamming the signal," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent tone. "They're already inside the perimeter." His eyes scanned each blurry camera frame. There was no alarm, no flashing lights. That could only mean one thing. The system had been hacked at its core. This wasn't a simple break-in, it was a professional operation, and it implied they had inside help. He pulled the handgun he'd been given by Sophie's head of security from the waistband of his pants and spoke into his earpiece. "Clara, get Leo to the basement, now. No questions, no delay. Sophie, get inside. Lock everything down." "They're here," he cut her off, his eyes fixed on the front yard. A shadow darted past the window. It was followed by a soft pop, and the ceiling light above them shattered, showering the floor with glass. "Where's Leo?" Sophie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Clara's taking him to the basement. It's safe there for now," Daniel said, his voice a low growl of concentration. Suddenly, a barrage of heavy pounding hit the back glass doors, and then came the sound of them shattering. Daniel kicked over a heavy marble coffee table, creating a makeshift barricade. "Stay close to me," he ordered. 2 men in black, their faces half covered by balaclavas, stormed in, moving with the fluid efficiency of trained operatives. Their rifles were equipped with laser sights, red dots dancing across the walls. Daniel seized the moment, lunging and yanking Sophie behind a structural wall as the first volley of shots ripped through the air where they had just been standing. He returned fire with his handgun, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. One of the men took a hit in the leg and dropped hard with a cry of pain. The other fired wildly, his shots chewing up the plaster of the wall. Daniel rolled behind the couch, dodging low, then sprang up and fired twice more. The shots hit the second man in the shoulder and stomach, and he collapsed onto the white rug, a splash of red blooming across its surface. In the sudden ringing silence, Daniel dashed toward the stairs. "Leo! Clara, where's Leo?" "He's down here." "It's locked." They were blowing the data, erasing their digital tracks. Daniel rushed toward it just in time to glimpse a third man in a black leather jacket slipping out through a side exit. The intruder paused, his face illuminated for a second by a remaining emergency light. He stared directly into a still-active security camera, a cruel smirk on his lips, before smashing it with the butt of his gun. But in that brief moment, he left a chilling, unmistakable message, his voice clear through the damaged audio feed. "You owe me, Sophie, and I'll collect with the boy." Daniel returned to find her trembling, her eyes wide with horrified recognition. "You know him," Daniel stated. She shook her head, then nodded, unable to form the words at first. "Marcus," she finally whispered. "It's Marcus, my former assistant. I reported him for embezzlement. He vanished after the indictment."
"Leo!"
He found her holding Leo, whose face was smeared with blood. "What happened?" Daniel demanded, dropping to his knees. "It's just a scrape," Clara stammered, her own face white with shock. "He tripped running down the stairs. He hit his head on one of the steps. It wasn't deep, but the sight of the blood on his son's skin undid something inside him." The boy opened his eyes, tears streaming down his face, and clutched at Daniel's shirt. "Please, don't leave me," he sobbed. Daniel held him tightly, pressing the boy's head against his shoulder. And for the first time since losing his own child years ago, he broke down and cried. The tears weren't for the fear or the violence. They were for the sudden, overwhelming agony of what it meant to have a son again, to feel this terrifying, protective love. It was the gut-wrenching awakening of a paternal instinct he thought had been buried and lost forever. In the dead of night, while the estate was wrapped in a tense silence following the attack, Sophie Laval sat alone in her office. She held a thin envelope, her heart pounding against her ribs. Driven by a relentless intuition she could no longer ignore, she had acted. After the first incident in the woods, she had tasked Clara with a discreet mission to retrieve a single strand of hair from the jacket Daniel had worn. Sophie had packaged it along with one of Leo's old toothbrushes and sent it to a private lab for priority analysis. Now, she held the results. Her hands trembled slightly as she tore it open. The words on the page were clinical, cold, and absolute. DNA analysis, match rate 99.94%. Sample 1, Leo Laval. Sample 2, Daniel Reed. She found Daniel standing watch by a window on the second floor, a silent sentinel staring out into the darkness. She didn't know what she had hoped for, a miracle or a denial, but all she knew now was that the truth had a weight all its own. She walked up to him and handed him the envelope. "I'm sorry I did this without telling you first," she began, her voice steady but deliberate. "But after everything, I couldn't keep living in this fog. I needed the truth." He read every line once, then again. His face remained a stone mask, but Sophie could see the way his jaw tightened, a small, involuntary reaction to the shockwave rippling through him. He set the paper down gently on the windowsill. "I had a family once," he began, his voice low and uneven, the words scraped from a place of deep pain. "A wife, a little girl. We didn't have much, but we loved each other." He swallowed hard, his gaze lost in the past. "They died in an accident, one I should have prevented. I was a soldier. I should have known how to protect them, but I wasn't there. When I lost them, I had no reason to keep living. I wandered like a ghost." He finally looked at her, his eyes hollowed out by memory. The revelation wasn't a joy. It was the confirmation of a second chance he never thought he'd get, and the terror of having something so precious to lose once more. The focus shifted immediately. The attack had been too clean, Marcus's knowledge too specific. He had help from the inside, Daniel stated the next day as they sat in Sophie's office, now a command center for their private war. The camera locations, the secondary access codes. Someone gave him an internal map. Daniel, however, wasn't thinking about corporate loyalty. He was thinking like a soldier, looking for the unexpected connection. Nathan Bowers, he said, the name dropping into the room like a stone. Nathan, Sophie recoiled. He's the CFO. He was my husband's best friend. He's Leo's godfather. The way he talks, the way his face never flinches, it triggered a memory. I've seen him before, at the military hospital back in 2017. He wasn't there visiting a wounded colleague. He was negotiating funding for a military biogenetics project. He stood in a shadowed corner of level B3, his eyes fixed on the elevator doors. As they slid open, Nathan Bowers stepped out, holding his familiar leather briefcase. He glanced around cautiously before walking to his silver-gray Mercedes. From the trunk, he retrieved a small metal box and took out a black USB drive, marked with a strange symbol. Just as Nathan was about to slip it into his inner jacket pocket, Daniel stepped out of the darkness. Nathan, Daniel, what are you doing here? This is my private parking space. I just wanted to see what you're hiding behind that moral facade. I remember the first time I met you, Daniel continued, stepping closer, his expression like stone. Military hospital. You were the liaison between the Laval Foundation and the program I was a part of. The program where I gave my sample. I remember you, the soldier who lost his wife, the one I told the nurse to keep the file on just in case you didn't make it. Not as a benefactor, but as Marcus's mole. You didn't know, did you? Daniel said, his voice dropping lower, that the genetic sample you managed was the key, that it's how we discovered Leo is my son. His eyes widened in genuine surprise. He had known about Marcus's plan for revenge, about the pressure on Sophie, but not this. Daniel pressed his advantage. You approved the release of all stored biological data to Marcus, he said, his voice cold as steel. That's how he knew Leo was my son before I did. That's how he found my weakness. He looked Nathan straight in the eye. You stood on the line between science and ethics, and you chose to sell that information. For what? Money from a man who's dragging you straight to the bottom? He simply turned away, his face a mixture of shock and defeat. His silence was the only confession Daniel needed. It was Nathan who had betrayed them all. It was Nathan who had given Marcus the weapon that targeted not just Sophie's company, but the very heart of Daniel's rediscovered soul. Here is Chapter 6, developed according to your instructions. Chapter 6, the final kidnapping and the rescue mission. The garden behind the Laval estate held a sense of peace so complete it was deceptive. Daniel crouched on the edge of the lawn, carefully adjusting the wing of the wooden toy airplane Leo had been carrying around for weeks. The boy sat cross-legged across from him, his eyes focused, completely absorbed in the moment. Off in the distance, Clara was watering the lavender, and Sophie stood on the second-floor balcony, a coffee cup in hand, watching them. For a brief moment, it felt real, like a family. But then a faint sound came from above, not loud, but just enough for Daniel's trained ears to know something was wrong. He looked up and saw it, a small, unmarked drone, hovering mid-air like a silent steel bird of prey, his entire body tensed. "Clara, get Leo inside." "Now," he said, his voice low and urgent as he stood in one swift motion. Clara turned, startled. "What's going on?" "Just get him inside," Daniel commanded. She moved quickly toward Leo, but just as they turned to go, a small gray van glided silently through the East Side service gate. It had a generic Technical Services logo printed on the side. 3 people in uniform stepped out, carrying toolboxes. "We're here to inspect the basement water system, per the request this morning," one of the men said, holding up a clipboard. Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself between them and Leo. "No one requested an inspection today." A faint Sweet-smelling draft drifted from it. Clara, who was still holding Leo's hand, froze, her face drained of color. She blinked rapidly, clutched her chest, and stumbled a few steps. What is this?" she gasped, her breathing turning shallow and fast before she collapsed onto the grass. "Clara!" Leo cried out, turning toward her. Daniel lunged forward, but it all happened too fast. One of the technicians closed in on Leo. Before Daniel could react, a wave of dizziness slammed into him, the same chemical agent filling his lungs. The world stretched and dissolved as if he were underwater, his body refusing to obey his commands. He was grabbed from behind, his strength failing him, and as his vision went black, the last thing he saw was one of the men lifting Leo into his arms. When Daniel came to, it was dusk. He was lying on his side in the grass, his head throbbing with a sickening pain. He stumbled to his feet, the yard eerily silent. There was no Leo, no Clara, no sign of the strange men or their van. He staggered toward the house, his heart pounding with a terror he hadn't felt in years. Then he stopped. Beneath a maple tree, something small had been taped to the trunk. His hands trembled as he peeled the paper away. Scrolled in blue crayon, the childish words came into focus. "Daddy, I'm really scared." The fear, the dizziness, the pain, it all vanished, burned away and replaced by a cold, unshakable resolve. He would not lose another child. He walked into the study and opened a steel drawer beneath the bookshelf. Inside was an old encrypted satellite phone. He didn't call the police. He knew they would be too slow. He made a call to a number that existed only in his memory, activating a network of men the world had long forgotten, but who had once kept each other alive through gunfire. "Rook, it's me," he said when the call connected. "I need you. Marcus Vale has my son." Rook, a former signal analysis expert from their Special Operations Unit, went to work immediately. Traffic cameras across the entire city of Boston were swept. A silver van with a concealed license plate was picked up at a gas station on the western side of town. Rook analyzed its speed, its route, and its destination. It all pointed to an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, just off Highway 3. Daniel arrived just past 11 p.m., moving through the rain-soaked darkness like a ghost. He was armed with only a folding knife, a handheld vibration sensor disabler, and a single-channel earpiece connecting him to Rook. He moved along the back wall of the warehouse, observing 3 guards. Through a cracked door at the far end of a hallway, he could see Leo, sitting quietly on the cold floor, holding the broken model airplane in his arms. His face was pale, but he wasn't crying. He was waiting, clinging to the fragile belief that his father would come. Daniel waited for the right moment when one of the guards left his post. Then he moved, quiet as the wind, slipping along the wall. At a side entrance, he used the disabler on a vibration sensor. 7 seconds. Then he slid through the narrow opening without a single footstep making a sound. He reached the room where Leo was held. The door was secured with a simple iron latch. He lifted it gently. No noise. As the door creaked open, Leo froze, his eyes widening. Daniel knelt softly, slowly, so as not to startle him. "You're safe now," he whispered. "Daddy's here." He threw himself into Daniel's arms, his small body trembling. "I'm taking you out of here," Daniel said, holding him close. "But you have to stay completely quiet, okay?" Leo nodded, burying his face in Daniel's shoulder. They backed out of the room. Just as they slipped down the corridor, the alarm for the entire facility went off, sirens blaring. It was the signal. Rook had used a special authorization code to send the local police storming the warehouse. While the rapid response team hit the main entrance, Daniel carried Leo through an old, dark drainage route in the back, escaping into the night as the sounds of the raid erupted behind them. Here is Chapter 7, developed according to your instructions. Chapter 7, Justice and a New Beginning. The next morning, the grand lobby of Laval Tech headquarters buzzed with the footsteps of engineers, security teams, and media personnel. On the massive LED screen overhead, bold letters read, "Touch the Future, the Rebirth Edition." This product launch wasn't just a tech event, it was Sophie Laval's first public appearance since a string of devastating crises. Behind the stage, in a private meeting room, Sophie sat in silence. Daniel stood near the door, a quiet guardian, while Leo rested on a small couch, exhausted but no longer overwhelmed with fear. When the announcement chime sounded, Sophie took a deep breath, stood up, and walked into the spotlights. Her posture was calm, but her gaze revealed a profound change. She took the microphone and looked directly into the camera. "I used to believe that technology could save the world," she began, her voice clear and steady, silencing the expectant crowd. "But in these past few days, I've learned something else. It's truth and courage that keep a child alive and a family from falling apart." Suddenly, from the middle row, a man stood up, holding a thick folder. His face was cold and expressionless. It was Nathan Bowers. "I'm sorry, Sophie," he said, his voice ringing with false regret. "I can't stay silent any longer." He walked up to the stage, holding the folder high for the press to see. "These are documents I've compiled over the past 2 years. Financial irregularities, suspicious wire transfers, misuse of investment funds. I'm obligated to speak out for the shareholders and for the sake of responsibility." Daniel, standing at the edge of the stage, didn't move. As whispers and gasps erupted across the auditorium, the LED screen behind Sophie flickered back to life. It wasn't showing a product demo. It was playing the surveillance video from the parking garage. On screen, Nathan was seen meeting with a man whose face was obscured, but whose voice was icy and clear. It was Marcus. "You either help me bring Sophie down," Marcus's voice echoed, "or I let the public know exactly where you laundered money back in 2016. The video ended, leaving the auditorium in shocked silence. Daniel stepped forward and held up a small USB drive. "The original recording has been verified by the FBI, he announced calmly. "They're here right now." One held up his badge. "Nathan Bowers, you're under arrest for aiding and abetting fraud and endangering a minor. Please come with us." Nathan stood frozen as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. As he was led away, he whispered to Sophie, "I didn't want it to end like this." "I was scared." Daniel answered him with only one sentence. "You should have been scared the moment you chose to side with darkness." 4 agents stormed in like shadows. He collapsed before he could even scream, a stun gun having fired straight into his chest. His reign of terror was over. Back at the conference, with the crime brought into the light, a reporter raised a microphone. "Miss Laval, who is the man standing next to you?" Her voice was steady. "He is Leo's biological father," she declared. "The man who risked his life to save my son. The only person I trust right now." Leo ran to the front, grabbing both of their hands. "Mom and Dad are both here now," he announced. "I'm not scared anymore." The once chaotic mansion was now eerily quiet. Daniel stood by the half-open window, carefully packing his belongings into an old weathered backpack. He was ready to leave, to fade back into the shadows, believing his part was done. Leo sat off in the corner of the yard, clutching an unfinished model airplane kit, his eyes red. "Are you leaving again, Dad?" the boy's voice asked, carrying no accusation, just a quiet, heartbreaking question. Daniel froze. Sophie stepped onto the porch, standing beside Leo. She didn't rush in with words, but let her presence be an open door. "Daniel," she said softly, "if you want to go, I won't stop you. But if you truly want to learn how to be a father, we're right here." All that remained was a choice. Leo ran to him, lifting the model airplane box toward his father. "You haven't helped me finish this yet." Instead of dragging his bag toward the gate, he opened it, pulled out a small toolkit, and sat down on the steps beside his son. "Let's start with the wings, okay?" Leo nodded enthusiastically. Sophie brought out a warm cup of cocoa and placed it beside Daniel. She said nothing more. She just sat there quietly, watching father and son lean over the pieces, assembling more than just a model plane. They were assembling a family. The sun dipped lower behind the trees, bathing the 3 figures in a soft golden light. In their shared quiet presence, the promise was already clear. They would be here together. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.